5 days to go to the by-elections of November 27th. That is Thursday next week. These by-elections are very important to the political players. They are as important to William Ruto as they are important to the Gachagua group. Two of them stand out. The Malava by-election in Kakamega County of the Western Region and the Mbeere North by-election in Embu County in Mount Kenya. The Mount Kenya one is particularly important to Rigathi Gachagua, who must, through this by-election, prove beyond doubt that indeed he is a Mount Kenya kingpin. Beyond that he, Rigathi Gachagua, has locked William Ruto out of Mount Kenya. On the other hand, William Samoei Ruto must be out to prove, one, that Kindiki was a good choice. And this good choice will be evident when he has a good showing in Mbeere North. Two, that although Rigathi Gachagua may be boasting of controlling the mountain, he, William Samoei Ruto, still has a say in the mountain and on the mountain. In the Western region, the Mlembe Nation, there are a number of points to be proved. One, that as was highlighted by the Star in some kind of opinion poll, the Star newspaper, that Western belongs to Ruto. There are those who believe that Western is gone. And there are those who believe, therefore, whatever attempts Ruto is making in Malaba will come to naught. On the other hand, Eugene Wamalwa of DAP and George Natembeya, governor of Trans Nzoia, must prove that they have locked William Samoei Ruto out of Western. These two by-elections are very important. Of course, Magarini is still important because if DCP wins very far away from Mount Kenya, it will be a signal and an indicator that for William Samoei Ruto, the die is cast. Because if Rigathi Gachagua can control Mount Kenya, have a big say, if not control Western Kenya through Eugene Wamalwa and Natembeya, and then have such a wonderful showing at the coast, of course there isn't a chance that William Ruto could win this election. So let's look at this by-election in a little detail. When you go to Malava, you find Faruku has camped there and has not left there. We all know who Faruk is. Where Faruk is, William is. And therefore, when you see Faruk in Malava, William Ruto has camped in Malava. Only yesterday, the second, the third, and the fourth most powerful people in government, highest-ranking government officials, one, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Papa Roma, Moses Wetangula, Prime Cabinet Secretary, Salim Mudavadi, Daboem, were camped in Malava yesterday. Oparanya, CS Cooperative, let's for the time being not mention the fact that a CS is not supposed to participate in elections. But Ruku is in Mbeere North. This, by the way I look at this by-election, I see many of them being nullified in the High Court. The open bribery, people queuing in their thousands to receive voter bribery, to receive money in the open during daylight. Cabinet secretaries openly campaigning. The violence in Nyanza that has even led to the death of an individual in Kaspur. Many of these by-elections are likely to be nullified by the High Court. That's beside the point. So now if you look at Malava now, what does Malava mean to William Ruto? First, the shame that will come William Ruto's way if he loses, and there are many who believe he will lose in Malava. The shame because Farouk has camped in Malava, I think more than 2 months. And people say it is William Ruto who has camped in Malava. Flip it over. If Ruto were to win this election in Malava, George Natembeya, Eugene Wamalwa will have nowhere to hide. Boni Khalwale, Cleo Malala, all these have made the Malava by-election a matter of life and death. They say the dignity of the Luhya man. Heshima kwa mtu Mluhya. Now, if they lose, hiyo heshima ya mtu Mluhya itaenda wapi? But there's a deeper way we should look at these by-elections. Supposing Panyako of the opposition parties win, the DAP candidate, but merely scraps through. If in Malava, as indeed in Mbeere North, William loses but manages about 45, 48%, even 40%, the question must seriously be asked, who will have won that by-election? Imagine Ruto getting 40% of Mount Kenya in a by-election. Imagine Ruto getting 40% through Ndakwa in Malava. Who will really have won that election? The opposition must answer this question. It will not be they who will have won. The implications of a Ruto 40% in Malava, a Ruto 35% in Mbeere North, must be viewed against the backdrop of the understanding that he's been chased out of Mount Kenya. How do you say you have chased somebody out of a region and he manages 40% of that region, of the votes of that region? I know by-elections are not a clear indicator of the general election because many other factors come into play. We've seen it in the past. But if Ruto loses but gets 40% in Mbeere North, Rigathi Gachagua, being a truthful man of God, must accept that things are not very good for him. That after fighting so hard, Ruto managed to get 40% through his candidate. I know there are all manner of things that will be said, including that this was about an individual, a Mbeere man against a Mbeere man. That's true, I know that. But there will be need for Gachagua to go back to the drawing board. It would mean that if through his candidate, Mudavadi something, if that guy gets 40% of the vote, it is the Ruto camp that will celebrate, not the Gachagua camp. Not when you have made it appear like Ruto cannot step in Mount Kenya. These are the implications one has to look at. And it will mean this. If Ruto manages 45% of the vote in Mbeere North, Gachagua and his people must understand and accept the reality that unless they go back to the drawing board, Ruto will get 30% of Mount Kenya votes. Now tell me, if Ruto were to get 30% of Mount Kenya vote in 2027 and get another 30, 35, 40% of Western vote, how would you beat him? How would you beat him? He will have won the elections. So this is a reality check. That if Ruto loses, but loses honorably, with reasonable percentages, while admitting that a by-election is not a clear indicator of what will happen in 2027, the opposition must get worried. Not concerned, I'm saying worried. I know a little English. They must get worried. They must get worried because if Ruto manages almost half of that percentage in 2027, then they will be having a lot of trouble. Big trouble. But there's something else. In my conversation with Philip Kisha, the executive director of the United Opposition, the ED of the loyal opposition, I tried to get him to understand, and I think he didn't want to give it a thought, what that would mean. Secondly, I tried to make him see that what would happen if Ruto won? Supposing Ruto wins Mbeere North. Supposing UDA wins Malava seat. Against all odds. Kisha called it a miracle. In politics, miracles happen all the time. Political miracles happen all the time. All the time. But sometimes what we call political miracles are miracles to us because we refuse to see what the possibilities that were lying ahead of us. We closed our eyes and refused to see. In 2016, I watched people agonized after Trump had won against Hillary. But I didn't, because I knew Trump stood a very high chance. There was gloom in Nairobi. Everybody believed Hillary was winning. So to them, that was like a miracle. The only reason they didn't accept, they didn't see it coming, was they closed their eyes to it. So let's call it a political miracle. But let's also accept that it could be the reality, that indeed that miracle has happened. That Ndakwa has won Malava. Then the somebody man has won against Newton Karish in Mbeere North. What is the other implication? What is the other implication? The other implication is this. Because, let's use very strong words, that there wasn't a chance in heaven that Ndakwa would win on UDA in Malava. That there wasn't a chance that the other guy would win on UDA in Mbeere North. That's the reality on the ground. We have a way of feeling and sensing. When Kibaki is winning in 2002, you don't have to be told by anybody, you can see it. When Raila has the entire country in 2007, apart from Mount Kenya region, you don't have to say anything. You can see it. It's evident. When somebody is winning by a landslide, it's always evident. Even children. We didn't have to wait for the elections of 2017 to be nullified for us to know Raila had won. Wherever you went in estates, small children were singing, NASA, NASA. You know? Hero, hero. Yeah, it was evident in the country that NASA was winning in 2017. So some of these victories are always evident. In Mbeere North, it is evident Newton Karish is winning. In Malava, it is extremely obvious, very evident, that Seth Panyako is the MP elect. But supposing even then, even with all these indicators that these two guys are winning in Mbeere and Malava, they lose. Will that be a loss? No. The possibility of foul play, the possibility of manipulating the elections, that possibility is real. In the Kenyan parlance, we say rigging. The possibility that elections would have been rigged would be so real. And then that must lead us to another question. If the by-elections are rigged in favor of UDA and its partner parties like ODM in Magarini, what is the take-home for Rigathi Gachagua? What is the take-home for Kalonzo Musyoka? What is the take-home for Eugene Wamalwa and Natembeya? For you, Natembeya and Eugene Wamalwa, if the election in Malava is rigged, what is your take? Let me make it simple for you. If against all these elections are won by UDA and sister parties, especially UDA in Mbere and Malava, and we all agree that they have been rigged, then we must accept that the 2027 will be terrible. That's number one. Why? Terrible because if we only have two by-elections to focus on, Mbere and Malava, and then that election is stolen in broad daylight, come 2027, you have 290 constituencies to supervise, to make sure elections are not stolen. If you can't manage two, will you manage 290? If you can't mobilize resources to protect your votes in two constituencies, and you are lucky I'm saying this thing before the elections happen. If you are still hiding your shilling in the pocket because you are naturally mean, even money is perhaps donated by well-wishers. I know politicians. People by now would have donated perhaps 200, 300 million for these by-elections because the persons donating will know what these by-elections mean. But the political leaders with the 300 million will only spend 50 million. And then, pop, you lose the elections. How will you then supervise and guard against foul play and rigging in 2027 against the system, against the incumbent who is known for being generous and who is well-resourced with all the instruments of power and state machinery and everything else? How will you manage if you can't manage two constituents? That is the implication, and that is the question. Will you manage 2007? That's the take home for you. Number two, were you so convinced you are winning, you didn't open your eyes, not just to see and prevent the rigging, but more importantly, to take home lessons, to see that these were the tactics that have been used, so that come 2027 you block. Because every election has its way of being rigged. And those who are specialized in rigging elections don't repeat. In the olden days, in the 70s and 80s, when the rigging started, you would find debates because you had your own debate where people put your votes and then some other candidate had their own. You'll find somebody's debate of votes was found floating on a river or in a forest somewhere. That's how rigging used to happen. In other words, elections used to take place in constituencies. Counting used to be done at the district headquarters. Districts then were just about 40 or 30. I think 30-something or 40. There were 30-something districts with that. So they will be taken to the district commissioner's place for counting at the district. Between the constituents and the district, those of my age will remember, carried in those Land Rovers, Land Rover 109 especially, the green ones, GK Land Rover, green in color, with a canvas at the top. The election officials and the police will drop some of those boxes to be taken up, swept away by rivers, and some of them hidden in forest. That was rigging those days. In the year 2007, It was stuffing. And how was this done? And Judge Kriegler said it. Judge Kriegler, looking at the election of 2007 after the post-election violence, said people were rigging in their strongholds. They were stuffing ballots in their strongholds. So how does it happen? At the close of the polling station, of the voting, which was at 5, for example, when everybody has gone, except those who are in, who are being allowed to vote, the gates have been closed. You now look at those who have not voted. Because when people vote, you cross the line against their names. Use a ruler and then cross. You check all that have not voted and they cross and drop the ballot in favor of Kibaki or in favor of Raila, according to Kriegler. That was the rigging strategy in 2007. In 2013, the strategy was evident in the Mutunga Supreme Court when he ordered the production of Form 34A, just a few of them to sample. You could see what was on the form is not what was put in the tallying. You could also see some, there was crossing. You crossed. That was the rigging then. I knew that in 2017, it will be electronic. And that's what happened in 2017. And Maraga was able to show, to demonstrate. In 2022, the strategy was again different. It was merely the transmission. They changed, JPEG, whatever, those who know. The form here, the bus, the votes took from a constituency to Bomas, that bus in the air. The electronic transmission of the results. That's where some game could have been played. I'm not saying it was played because this was not proved in court. Again, in 2022, if you remember, somehow 2 sets of ballots were brought. Then the late, what was this, the chairman of the IBC, I can't remember his name, Chapkati, was asked, how did you bring 2 sets? He said it was a mistake. So what shall we do? They will all go to the polling stations, but the presiding officer will put the unused ballot booklet in the same box where the votes are put and sealed. When they were sampled under the supervision of the registrar of the High Court, many of those ballot boxes had been opened. And some of those empty booklets, the B one, A was used, were found missing. So how would you say the election was fair, free and fair? But these are things the opposition ought to have seen. Those extra ballots ought to have been locked in some warehouse in Nairobi, all of them. And each candidate would have a padlock on the warehouse. Sometimes these politicians, I don't understand. They seem not, these guys are overrated. And I've said people become big through accident, through favoritism, through fate, through inheritance. So you see people looking big, but hapa hakuna kitu. How could they allow that to happen? Why didn't they lock this extra booklet in a warehouse in Nairobi? And each candidate would have their padlock. Padlock ya Ruto, Sakaja, ya Raila, Pak. Those other 2 guys, including Wajakoya, Pap. All of them. Then you shall come and supervise that they were the way we left them before we talk about fair elections. So today, will the opposition, if they lose this election, not even losing, even a very good showing, and not a very not so normal showing that raises red flags, will they look at the strategies that have been used and know we go to 2027, we have to be careful of this. So these by-elections are critically important. Important because whether Ruto wins or not, how well he performs must be a warning to the opposition. You are not as safe as you think. It is also critical, finally, to actual politicians. If Ruto loses Mbeere North and loses badly, Cecil Mbarile, the governor of Embu, you are not safe. Ruto atakufuta kwa akili yake kabisa. If you are seeking a second term, forget. Not from Ruto. In fact, UDA could have a different candidate. CS Ruku. If Ruto loses in Mbeere and loses badly, Bwana Ruku CS, your days are numbered in cabinet. Kithure Kindiki, this could have been deliberate on the part of Ruto to create this by-election. It's Ruto who created it by making CS Ruku a CS, creating that by-election in Mbeere North. It could have been a trap, so that if Ruto loses badly, he will have the excuse to say, Bwana Kindiki, this thing is not working, my brother. Let's work in other ways. It's not working. You want to work wamekata. Because this is Mount Kenya East. So careful how this thing works out. It could mean the end of Kindiki's career, the end of Cecil Mbarire's career, and certainly the end of Ruku. Ruku beyond these others, more than these others, because for him, it is the next reshuffle which is going to happen a day or two after the by-elections, because the president could not have a by-election in which he removes Oparanya, for example, and expects to win Malava. The opposition will run with it. And in Western, Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Wetangula, as soon as Ruto loses badly in Malava, it will not be Farouk he will blame. All blame will be on Wetangula, Mudavadi, and Oparanya. And for Oparanya, the loss in Malava can only be equated to your living cabinet. And therefore, this by-election is important, but we pray that they go safely, whichever way they go. We ask Kenyans to remain peaceful, because beyond the by-elections, we have a country.